now call on Daniel Johnson to speak to and to move Amendment 13679.3. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. And let me start by approaching this debate, I think, very much in the spirit, I think, that is being offered by the Government. And I think the economy is too important, in a sense, to discuss it only through the narrow frame of partisan jibes, discussion and disagreement. And actually, I think there are broad areas where there probably is disagreement, and frankly, broad areas which are just very complicated and require the kind of open approach, pragmatic discussion and actually examination of the different ideas in order that we can actually secure the future that we want for everyone. But can I say that I very much welcome the Government using the word growth. And that's where I'd like to begin my remarks, because it is really important. And I think growth is important for three key reasons. First of all, from the Labour benches, that we believe that the best way of eradicating poverty is by increasing access to well-paid jobs, high-productive, high-wage jobs. And that is only possible if you have growth. Growth for growth's sake is not very useful. Now, I know Ross Greer isn't in the chamber, but we were just doing Politics Scotland earlier on, and he was saying GDP is too crude a measure, and I agree. But GDP per head is fundamentally important. That's a measure I will return to. But secondly, demographic change. If we are going to organise our economy with a working-age population smaller than the post-working-age population, we need growth. We need more people doing more productive jobs, and that will not be easy. And finally, if we are going to realise our net zero potential, if we are going to have a 21st century energy economy based on renewables, we need growth. We fundamentally need investment. We need our energy to be more efficiently produced, and that will only be delivered if we achieve growth. I'm happy to give way to Fergus Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
I must say I do agree with the principles of what Mr Johnson has said. To achieve that growth in renewables, does he agree with me that it's essential that we continue to support our oil and gas sector, because they have the investment that we need from the private sector, and they have the skills that we must retain if we're to develop the supply chain and achieve the success, and if we are to maintain investor confidence to raise the £1.4 trillion that's required to invest in renewables, only a small fraction of which the Government can afford.
Daniel Johnson.
Well, look, I agree with the broad sentiment. I suspect there may be some points of disagreement implied, but let me acknowledge this, that, look, two things. First of all, transition is a necessity. We have 10% of the extractable resource left in the ground. So whatever we do, we need to transition. And critically, if we're going to realise some of our strategic potential in terms of floating offshore, carbon capture and storage, the expertise, the engineering required to do that is going to come from the oil and gas sector. Those are the people that know how to do that stuff. And where I absolutely agree is that we cannot have a cliff edge. We need those jobs, we need those skills, we need those assets, and so that transition has to be a partnership between government and those people that have that expertise. But I'd just like to make some progress. But look, I think critically, that is why growth matters. And I would bring back to that point around eradicating poverty and improving equality. And I know my colleagues, both Alec Rowley and Faisal Chowdhury, will continue on those points about how we expand opportunity and how growth should be used to expand opportunities for all. Now, in terms of our amendment this afternoon, I think what is important, if we're going to realise those opportunities, we need to understand our headwinds. What are both the risks and the threats that we have? And I fear sometimes when the Government approaches these topics, they want to circumscribe. We've already had a little bit of that. The Government is very, very keen to highlight figures or metrics that show where they have succeeded, but fairly unwilling to look at either the broader context or those metrics which point in the opposite direction. And this is why I come back to GDP per head, because the simple fact is this: in the first decade of this new millennium, the gap in GDP per head between the UK and Scotland shrank. It shrank from about a 10% gap to about a 5% gap. But in the subsequent decade, it has increased. Now, I think whatever other metrics one wants to use, that is the fundamental one that we have to focus on, because that is actually a loss of opportunity, a loss of earning potential for people. So let's start with that one. But we also need to recognise that it's a lack of investment that is holding this country back. And again, the headline figures often obscure this, but up until the previous quarter, we had 7 quarters of decline in that self-same metric across the UK. The reason for that is poor levels of investment. But we also need to look at things like entrepreneurial activity. Again, Scotland lacks in terms of entrepreneurial activity and company creation. And most critically, we have unequal growth. The reality is the vast bulk of growth in Scotland is generated from Scotland's own south east. The output per hour worked in Edinburgh and the Lothians is some 50% higher than it is in other parts of Scotland, such as the West or around Tayside. So why is that? And I would suggest that we need to look at those issues. What are the structural barriers? Where are the regional economic development strategies that should enable people to link up between the opportunities that exist in other parts of Scotland with their potential, their skills, their talents in the places that they live? Now, how much more time do I have, Deputy Presiding Officer?
I can be relatively generous.
Relatively?
Yeah.
I'll understand
up to 7 minutes.
Up to 7 minutes. That's very kind, Deputy Presiding Officer. I don't know what I've done to deserve that, but I'll take it. But critically, what we need to do is have much greater focus and clarity. That's why we set out in our document, Building a Business Case for Scotland, 3 key focuses around Brand Scotland, Net Zero, technology and financial services. And I note the Deputy First Minister might have highlighted the same 3 focuses in a recent column that she wrote for I think it was the Herald newspaper. So I'm very grateful and flattered by that compliment. But I think we also need to focus on the how. Because it's not just, I think, enough to have those focuses. I share many of our ambitions, but what needs to change? What are the things in our enterprise agencies, our policy approaches, which are holding those things back? So I think we need greater clarity across our enterprise agencies. We often talk about a cluttered landscape, but it's not just about necessarily reducing the number, but I think making sure that they have clear function and focus and that they're working together. I think we need a much better focus on actually how wider policies impact on these things. We've already talked about planning, but what are other points of regulation and points of contact between the private sector and government are impeding things? And we need much better ability to do regional economic delivery. And I think that goes much far beyond what regional economic partnerships seek to deliver. We need genuine regional approach to government. And I think my 7 minutes is up. But critically, this is about how we improve the life chances of people across Scotland. That's why growth matters. It's about tackling poverty, tackling inequality, increasing people's life chances. And I'll close there. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Johnson.